Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here for another Science on the Ballot training opportunity. I know we're pretty ahead and forge through the information that we wanted to share with you all so that we can record it, share that recording with you, make sure that you can come revisit it whenever you'd like. So this link uh, to the recording will be on the Science on the Ballot program website, and resources that you see me talk throughout will definitely be on there as well. So we'll go through this, and then if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. You'll have an opportunity at the end of this presentation to see all my contact information again. So if something comes up, happy to schedule one-on-one conversation about anything we discuss here today. So tonight, we're getting a little bit deeper into the program and getting a little bit more of an opportunity for coalitions to use this as a time to ask questions and collaborate more than just sharing information out. And so I have in my slide deck all the various information and background information about Science on the Ballot, but those are in all the other recordings as well as the website. So I'm not going to spend much time on here. We're here to engage candidates on critical science and technology issues and get that information into the public's hands so that they can make informed voting decisions. That's what it's all about. And along the way, we'll work on training opportunities for our state coalitions to be able to do this work, not only in the context of this program, but throughout the rest of their careers as well. So that's just a little bit of the background that you've seen me present a few different times. And again, all of that's on the website if you want to take a deeper dive into it. Tonight, what we really wanted to focus on were the two components that are probably most pressing to you all right now, the things that you are going to be spending the majority of your time over the next few months working on, which is developing the questions themselves, and along with that, kind of making some decisions on the candidates that you want to pursue. And remember that you're pursuing all the candidates in a particular campaign. You can't leave folks out. As well as getting feedback and input on your questions. So, excuse me, the bulk of what we'll discuss tonight will be around questions and some tips, tricks, things like that to help you feel confident about the process moving forward. And some of you may have already started some work. Wanted to start with a little to begin with, why that is a cornerstone of this program, and why other nonprofits and organizations that want to engage elected officials and candidates use questionnaires. And it all comes down to what I said just a moment ago, that these questions, what we do in this program, help voters make informed decisions ahead of election day. It's also, for those that are participating in the program, an opportunity to work with other organizations, to network, attract new members if you're part of a chapter-based organization or you're part of an org that has members. NSPN obviously fits those categories, but some of you may also be part of other organizations and are representing a few different folks when you're participating in this program. And so it's a great way to connect and meet with other people across your state as well as across the country that are engaged in similar work. It also provides a platform for candidates to share their views on community concerns in a neutral setting, fair, open. That's why we work so hard to be nonpartisan. And it shows those candidates that the things we're asking questions about are things that the community members care about and are issues that we should want to highlight. And so it brings awareness of these issues to candidates that might otherwise let them slip through the cracks. And it allows for a particular office or candidate to share their positions in writing, which is a little bit different than even just catching up with a candidate in person. But it provides a little bit of an easier pipeline from what the candidate or the office has to say on a particular topic to the voters themselves through websites, social media, all of the different ways that we'll work on disseminating that in the late stage of the program. And then questions, are going to cover a broad and unbiased range of issues that don't necessarily reflect our organization's views. That's why it's not partisan, but it can prioritize things that we as folks who are engaged in science policy want to see more attention given to by those that are seeking political office. And so that's a way to have a really diverse set of issues, but ones that we all obviously care quite a bit about. As a big picture kind of overview about developing questions and sort of what to expect over the next several months, I kind of put this into 4 categories of the question building process. First step being brainstorming, where you're just getting all of your ideas out there on paper for your coalition group to start thinking about. Next stage is taking what you've brainstormed, for this is where you can really broaden the impact and reach of what you're asking about, because you're inviting others to the table to see what you're potentially missing, as well as to have a little bit more weight in who is determining these questions. And when you are then doing your campaign outreach later on in the program, you can speak to the number of organizations that had input and show that it is a priority for the entire community. And so that's sort of the next phase. Then with the input that you've gotten from partner organizations with a little bit more refinement, you can share sort of your draft questions with NSPN. We will review them. I've mentioned before that we are in the process of hiring a part-time coordinator that will oversee this program. So they, myself, as well as other members that have a lot of experience with this program in the past, will be able to provide feedback and input, make sure that there's not gaps in terms of topics that maybe should be covered, or things that you should consider making sure that you ask that would be relevant to your state, but also making sure that nonpartisan element is there. And then doing that final revision, narrowing your questions down, making sure what campaigns are relevant to ask those questions to, whether it's local, state, federal, those kinds of things, and then getting that final approval to start doing the outreach. So those are kind of the 4 stages that you can expect in developing these questions that's going to be useful over the next several weeks and months. So I wanted to talk a little bit about brainstorming questions and share with you a resource. Again, this will be live on our page for the program itself. And when I send a follow-up email, I'll make sure that this link is in there as well. But, the first step is to really think through what are the main topics that you want to focus on when reaching out to campaigns in your state. And I listed some of the ones that I think are pretty universal, and every state has a vested interest in things like public health, climate, environment, energy, research and education, and particular campaigns, policy priorities when it comes to science and technology, as well as innovation. And so there's a short link there, bit.ly/SOTB question bank, that has organized by those different topics, sample questions from last year in particular. And we'll continue to add to that, as well as share information about what types of campaigns were asked those questions. You can see what state they came from, and then again, see them organized in those different groups. It also has a little search bar feature, and so it's very easy to navigate. And if you wanted to look up something in particular, like land rights or water, you don't have to browse through all the environment questions. You could just do a search and see what questions have those relevant keywords. So it's a great way to get started, and to see what others have asked in the past and maybe had some success with, and then build those questions from there. So you don't have to start completely from scratch, but certainly thinking about those priority topic areas is going to be a key starting point if you are new to the program and you haven't participated in this type of work before. It can kind of help guide you of the types of questions that you need to be thinking about. And then you can look at the question bank and get some inspiration from there. There's also other organizations that have done questionnaires. So, a quick Google search will help you find some resources there. And there's a few others that are already linked on the website that have sample questionnaires as well. So you can see what other nonpartisan questions are like. So once you have everything brainstormed and you've put together, your document, whatever shared use tool that you want to use to be able to work with your team to start developing your questions, it's time to start reaching out to local organizations, other nonprofits, other groups related to things like agriculture, energy, health, Things even within your own university or college affiliation. There's often, government relations offices, or there may even be school public policy, or other folks that would be invested in providing feedback on the questions that you're asking. And so this is a great way to kind of think through where, who you might want to identify there. I also listed some other kind of voter registration national organizations: League of Women Voters, Students Learn, Students Vote Coalition. Those are, big sort of nationwide advocacy groups that care a lot about voter engagement, who, while they may not be able to offer specific advice on science policy in particular, or specifically, what they could do is help you strategize, help you plan, help you talk about that kind of engagement, because they are used to doing that all the time. And they may even have, supports of other organizations or chapters in your state or in your city that could be good to connect with, either for some additional folks that might be interested in joining your coalition, as well as maybe just folks that are connected to those organizations that could give you some specific feedback. Some other things that you can kind of brainstorm and think about is going based off of the different topics that you've identified in your questions. And so when you think about public health, well, there's all kinds of professional organizations for healthcare workers that have a vested interest in understanding where campaigns fall on those subjects. And so there's definitely nonprofits that are engaged in that work. There's, health-based nonprofits that are focused on a particular issue within public health that would have a vested interest in those types of questions and how campaigns answer them. So those are, ones that you can look for. And the closer they are to your community, they have offices there, if that's where they're based, if they're focused on statewide sort of initiatives, all the better to get their input. You can think of different conservation departments for things like climate and the environment, farmers associations and groups for things on agriculture, university leaders. If you're talking about education and research, you can also think about early sort of education and training opportunities. And, public schools have a wealth of organizations that support that work that might be able to comment on those types of questions. And there's a lot of community focused organizations, museums and zoos even, that are, tied very closely to some of these science policy issues that are incredibly public facing and are some of the ways that the public most often interacts with science and technology in their sort of day-to-day lives. And so they could also provide some guidance or input on your questions as well. And so, you can start building your list out and then narrow it down from there, and then start finding contact information. So one of the things that we can do, the next time that we meet, and feel free to use this in your own time, but just start doing a search. And there's a form here where you can just input the name of the organization, their website, and what policy areas they might be aligned with. And we can start building that database out. And then NSPN can also help support finding contact information like that. So again, this link will be available to you to just start brainstorming those potential partner organizations, and we can even help you track down good information for them if it's hard to find or not easily available on their website. So some other things to sort of consider when it comes to developing your questions for the campaigns. These are just some broad sort of things to think about, including questions on a broad range of issues or, a range of diverse topics, all within obviously science and technology policy is a good idea. It may be tempting to focus completely on public health or climate, but really showing that there are a lot of different issues and they may be interconnected, but trying to kind of broaden the types of things that you're asking questions about. Ultimately, you'll wind up with a list of about 10 questions to send to candidates. And so, while you don't have to have 10 distinct science policy issue areas, trying to at least have more than one or two would give you that broad range of issues. So aim to have just a couple of questions, one or two, on an array of topics that are relevant to you and your state. You want to keep your questions open-ended. This isn't the opportunity to ask just a strict yes or no, or give them like multiple choice. This is a chance to provide an opportunity for them to really expand on their thinking, to let them explain their answers within a reasonable word limit, but to give some context not only about what their stance is and how they approach things, but why they feel the way that they do. They should always be neutral, not hint at a correct answer. We talked about that in our nonpartisan engagement training, but we don't want to lead folks by the way that we word questions or seem like there is a right or a wrong to the question. We're providing a platform. And so you can always remember those nonpartisan engagement guidelines that we talked about and that are on the website, or reach out to me if there's a particularly complex issue that you want to bounce ideas around and talk through. Just as a reminder, here's some of those engagement guidelines that we talked about earlier in the summer that are really tied to the development of your questions. Do coordinate with those local organizations, review your questions. You'll seek final approval before sharing them with campaigns, and you want to use the same questions for every candidate in a particular race. Again, the distinction there is, you can ask somebody running for US Senate a set of 10 questions, but everybody that's running for that US Senate seat should get those same 10 questions. You can ask a different set of 10 questions to somebody who's running for state assembly, but everybody who's running for that seat in the state assembly should get those same questions. As I was just saying, do not use that leading language. Don't assume intent or that there's a right or wrong answer. Don't just develop questions that are focused, that are not primarily focused on science policy issues. We all know that science policy and technology policy touch so many different things in different ways, but question why a science and technology focus group would be asking that question. And also avoid referring to specific legislation in your questions. That can get really tricky and that can really come across as partisan. You can provide context. Historically, this thing has passed and it now is leading to X, Y, and Z things that we're seeing happening in our state. What is your stance on that? What's happening? So you can provide some contextual information, but you don't want to ask how a particular candidate would support or not support some sort of pending legislation. And then this is just sort of building on what I was just talking about. You want to use the same question set for all candidates in a particular campaign, use the same language, neutrality. You want to give folks the same timeline to answer, and you want to share and represent candidate responses equally. And we'll have lots of time to talk more about the candidate side of things once we actually get started on the outreach itself and the questions are starting to be developed. So I'd love for folks to take a few minutes to answer a few quick questions after you've watched this video and after you've participated today, just to let us know what questions are still circling, what things you're excited about, and what other trainings and opportunities would be most helpful to you moving forward. And so I'll share that link out with folks as well. Give us a couple minutes of your time just to share what else we can do to be supporting coalitions moving forward in the program. Here again is my contact information, sam@scipolinetwork.org. I'm happy to be a first point of contact for any questions they have about the program or about NSPN in general, so feel free to reach out. Also always happy to schedule a one-on-one or a group meeting with the state coalitions if there's something in particular that you want to talk about that you need support with. That's what we are here for. And then of course, here's all of our socials again for you to continue to connect with us and stay up to date about what's happening with Science on the Ballot, as well as other programs that we have to offer. So that is it, since we have a small group and wanted to get through all of this information in a timely manner. So hopefully this was helpful. Slides and everything will be on our website soon. So we look forward to seeing what questions you have from here. And we will see you again in September for our next sort of coalition meeting. From this point forward, during the question development process, these meetings will really become an opportunity to share ideas, ask questions, troubleshoot things that you're working on. A lot more time for the coalitions to be able to work with each other and brainstorm and collaborate as part of the process. And then when we get more to the other stages of the program, we'll get back to being able to provide some trainings, but we still want to offer some space and time for coalitions to get together and collaborate. So that's what you can kind of expect in September. And hopefully we'll be able to introduce a new staff member that will be able to help be a good point of contact on this program and take some lead on supporting individuals and coalitions as we move forward in the 2024 election cycle. So really excited to continue this work. If you have questions, please reach out, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks.